Well, just, first of all, welcome all. Good to see you. About as just a little bit of background, about 6 months ago, we were kicking around different ideas, and one of them that had come up was trying on a monthly basis to have topics that people can check in on that hopefully would be helpful at the congregational level. So we've done various ones of these. We meet with the fourth Thursday of the month. We call them ministry enrichment. And they've been met with those that have participated. I think have enjoyed them. And this month is about budgeting. We know that fall rolls around and all our congregations begin to talk about the next year's budget and what the numbers have to be. Old traditional was strictly by a number. And we thought maybe something interesting this year might be to talk about narrative budget. And Scott Schulte is Synod Treasurer, and has been for, Scott, how long have you been doing I know you've been doing Advent stuff for about 30 years. But
yeah.
What about Synod?
15, I want to say. Yeah.
Sounds about right. Yeah.
Yep.
So we've asked Scott and many of you have seen Scott at Synod Assembly during presentation, but to talk to us about what is the narrative budget and how do you go about doing that? And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Scott.
Okay. Awesome. All right. So I am the Synod Treasurer. And then, as they've also pointed out, I've been a congregational treasurer for a long time. And so have I'll say a fair amount of experience with narrative budgets. And so happy to do this and to share what I know. And also to point you to where there are resources that can help, right, with this as well. That there are a number of them, but there are even some that are available through the elca.org website, and I can point those out or talk about those as we go. So I guess there's a couple things I wanted to talk about is that are kind of ground rules, I say. So as I go through here, feel free to ask questions as I go. If you're like me, if I wait till the end of the presentation or the appropriate question and answer time, I might forget what my question was. So I have no problem if you want to stop me and ask a question. I'm happy to do that. And if the answer is that I'm going to get to that later, then I'll tell you that and postpone that answer till then. And if I don't have the answer and it's something that I can go look up or research for you, I'll be happy to do that. I'll just jot that message down, or that question down, and then get back to you on that. So that's what I'll do here, and I'll try to, if a question does come up in the chat feature for Zoom, I'll try to keep an eye on that. But once I get rolling, I may not look at that. So David, yeah, if you flag me down if something comes up, that'd be great.
Good.
All right. So with that, we'll get into it. So narrative budget, a story to tell. And I'll read this quote. I'm not planning to read all the information on the slides here, but I'll just read this quote. Each of our faith communities has a story to tell about how it responds in thanksgiving to the call to serve God's people. It is a story that includes worship, fellowship, evangelism, faith development, outreach, and pastoral care. All the big hitters, right? A narrative budget is a resource to tell that community's story. So I would absolutely agree with that, and which is why I put this on here. That that a narrative budget is written to tell the story, unlike the traditional line item budget that I'll show you an example of here on the next slide. It is written to tell the story of the congregation or the synod or whatever community it is that has a budget to present. A narrative budget is a very effective tool for telling the story about that organization. So I'm going to talk then about, okay, so what is the difference between a narrative budget and a line item budget? And that'll be pretty clear. And then I'll talk about how do we prepare, what are the steps to prepare a narrative budget? So we'll get into that as well. All right, so what you're seeing now is page 1 of the 3-page line item budget for the Synod. This was what was approved at the Synod Assembly back in June. And this I would call a line item budget. This is the traditional budget. They've been done for for decades in this format. Before the advent of Excel and spreadsheet software, this was a much more difficult task. It is done with pencil and adding machines. But now you'll often see these kinds of spreadsheets that presented as the budget, and that's fine. These budgets, as I said, line item budgets, these are necessary. This is how you get to your overall budget. You've got to start with what are all your expenses, what are all your anticipated revenues, and come up with your budget, which is really just a plan. So don't get me wrong. I may in the next slide I may be casting some not negativity, but just some pointed comments about line item budgets. But don't get me wrong; these are necessary, and these have to capture the details behind what you'll see in a narrative budget. But I just wanted to show you here's an example of a line item budget, and typically what we do each year for Synod Assembly is we publish this budget along with the narrative budget, so that the folks that want to see the detail can. And then the folks that don't care about the detail can look at the narrative budget and get the story, right, that we want to tell about what the underlying ministries and vision is that's captured in the budget. So a line item budget, as I was saying, it's a great tool, great for planning and tracking income and expenses. It is typically prepared by the treasurer or the finance committee for congregations, and it's also reviewed by the council. It's the same process the synod uses. Some of the drawbacks to it, though, are it assumes that others are as knowledgeable about what's going on in the congregation or the synod as they are, which is more often than not a bad assumption. The people that are putting this together are very in tune with what's going on and what are the ministries and the missions that are being supported. But the folks that are reading this output, right, either at an annual meeting or other forums, they may not have that background, and so the line items don't mean as much to them. They can't tell, well, what is it we're doing with the line item budget. The other drawback is, how many members of your congregation are inspired by the fact that their donations are funding the postage meter, right, or a photocopier. Or even better, how excited are they getting about knowing they're helping to pay for heat or electricity, or my personal favorite, pumping out the septic tanks, right? That's really inspiring, right, for people to donate. They know that these things are necessary. It's part of operating the building, operating the space where the congregation comes to worship and where the offices are and so forth. But they don't really want to talk about them too much, right? That's not exciting. Some of the drawbacks, right, around line item budgets, and I'm sure we could talk about other drawbacks that you see or other concerns that you have. I know for years as I would walk through line item budgets, if I spent too much time on walking through it, I can see the glaze starting to happen, as people are listening, and so. Really in tune with that, and so that's something that a narrative budget can help to avoid. So a narrative budget tells a story, and we already mentioned that. It tells a story. It's a representation of that line item budget that I first showed you, but it represents that in simple, easy to understand terms, right, and with a lot fewer numbers. For people to look at. Often these narrative budgets contain the following things: congregational pictures. What? Pictures in a budget? Quotes, illustrations, graphics, and if you want to get wild and crazy, pie charts, right, that are can all be part of this narrative budget. And this is all good stuff, and we'll see some examples of some of these as I go along. In short, the narrative budget, it provides a vision for what the ministries is and what the plan is for the congregation, rather than just a spreadsheet of line items. It tells the story. And what story is it telling? Well, it's taking a multitude of different things and putting it into a cohesive story. So it brings in the dollars, yes, it brings in some of those items from the line item budget, but it also tells a story involving people and the ministries that your congregation or the synod is wanting to share. We talked about donors not being excited about funding the electrical bill or the septic or pumping out the septic tanks. In general, they're not excited about donating to the operating budget without knowing how their donations are going to impact the lives of God's people, right? Through the ministry of the congregation. Right? What if I donate? How am I impacting the world or my neighborhood, right? Or my community? So with a narrative budget, really what it needs to do is it needs to show, here's the purpose and the goals for the ministry or for the congregation, and it focuses on, these are the ministries that we are supporting as a part of our overall goal as a congregation, as our purpose. And when the members can see that, when they can see how the connectivity for what they donate and how that supports the different ministries that are comprise the congregation, they're going to be more inspired to donate, right? They may increase their offerings, but at least they won't have doubts about about giving to the electricity bill. They'll be more excited about some of the things we're doing in outreach, for example, or other ministries that the congregation is about, that really the building helps to enable, but you're not just asking them to donate for an electrical bill. So what kind of stuff is in a good narrative budget? And this is all good stuff. So as I mentioned, it reflects your congregation's budget, the line item budget, in more descriptive terms. It helps your members relate to what the congregation's mission is, right? Through talking about the ministries that are supported as opposed to the different budget categories. It tells the story that can be shared with the congregation, but also it can be shared beyond that, right? This can be something that could be given to new members to help them get excited about what the church is about. And I think in general, it can be used or can be looked at as a marketing tool, which is perfect for being a part of a stewardship program or acting as a stewardship resource, because it's telling the story, right? That's what that's about. It's wanting people to get excited about what your congregation is doing. It can build involvement, so people can get excited about, yes, reading the budget, and get excited about what the ministries are being supported, and it shows how the church is spending the resources that it has, and in dollars, yes, but in some cases, and in not necessarily what the synod does necessarily right now, but in some cases, narrative budgets can also show where the time of the staff and of the volunteers, members that are helping to make these ministries go, where are they spending their time, right? That can show how the congregation is using the resources of time and talent and treasure, right, for the congregation to make the ministries of the congregation go. It tells a story. And so I probably said that about 5 times now. So hopefully you're picking up on the theme there, that a narrative budget is really a story. Okay, let me pause there to see if anybody has any questions at this point about, okay, what is a narrative budget and how does it compare or relate to a line item budget? Okay. Well, as I said, if you have a question that comes up, feel free to bring it up, and I'll move on. So, okay, so what so you don't read ahead. Let me go back here. So what I'm about to share is Scott's 5 easy steps to putting together a narrative budget. Now, I probably just told you a big lie, right? Because I said easy. in there. And those of you that have put together a narrative budget or tried to know that it's not an easy process, at least initially. And as I go through here, you'll see why it's not easy. But there are I think these 5 steps will kind of give you the roadmap for how do you put one together, right? And you'll see that it does take some time. It'll take some planning for the work that needs to be done to put this together. It may require some thinking ahead about, you know, what exactly is the story we want to share. So it'll take some guidance from the leaders of the congregation. And you'll see that also that it takes a village, right? It's really something that requires involvement from a cross section of the congregation to actually do a good narrative budget, and we'll talk about that here. So okay, so let's jump into what are the steps. So step 1, you need to define what your areas of ministry are and consolidate them or form those into, and really ideally 6 key areas. 6 seems to be the magic number. You don't have to constrain yourself to 6, or you don't have to. If you only have 4 or 5, that's fine too. But I would not go much beyond 6, because then you're getting a little too complicated perhaps, and there's too much, right? There's too much to digest. 6 seems to be a good number. So you need to take a look then at what are the various ministries of the congregation, and how can we put these into some meaningful key categories so that we can share the story with the congregation. And so I've listed 6 that are very typical. I think they work in most cases, but again, you're not constrained by those. You can, if your congregation would have something that's different from that, that's fine, right? But try to keep the total to 6. And then you'll see I put down there in red, do not have an area called administration. Because that's kind of going the other way from that. That harkens too much back to the line item budget, where you have, well, this is all our administrative expenses. And that's that kind of interrupts the story, right? That's kind of a speed bump for the story, because people are not excited about administration. They want to know about worship, and they want to know about evangelism and pastoral care. Now, what's the little secret there is that there are administrative things that are done in each of those 6 key areas, right? To help support those ministries, but you're not calling out the focus on those things. You're calling out the focus on what are the ministries, what's the mission that we are supporting with some of those administrative things, right? So the word, the golden rule there, one of them is don't have something called administration. That just provides some interruption for your story. All right, so we've defined our 6 areas of ministry. And we'll go with this for the sake of this presentation. We'll go with these 6 that I've defined here. So we'll then go on to step 2. Step 2. All right, who's involved? And I said it takes a village. So let's talk about who's involved. So starting on upper left, the treasurer, the finance committee, the financial secretary, those people have to be involved, right? It's a budget after all. Now they are putting together the line item budget, and are providing the numbers for the narrative budget. So they have to be involved, right? They're providing all the raw material. Well, not all of it, but they're providing the numerical raw material for your narrative budget. Okay, so that one would seem to be obvious. The next box, congregation committees. So why do they need to be involved? Well, they're the ones that are, in a lot of cases, overseeing or driving the ministries of the congregation. You're gonna need to leverage them to describe their ministry, and to help in providing things like, well, what are all the things that you do, right? We need to know that so we can tell the story. And they also then can provide perhaps a bit of description around what they do, how they use the money, how they're, what the impact is of their ministries. That's all good information to share. They may be able to get quotes from those that may have been impacted or involved in the ministries that those committees oversee, and quotes from people that can speak to those ministries. Those are gold, right, for a narrative budget. The next group, staff members, including the pastor. So, all right, so yeah, I kind of see why they're involved, right? Because they might have input to the budget and maybe the work of the committees, yes, which is all true. However, we need to know how they spend their time. Because if what we're going to do with this narrative budget is we're going to try to come up with an estimate of how much time they spend supporting those 6 ministries, those 6 key areas that we talked about, right? So one of the bits of information that needs to be gathered is, okay, so pastor, how much time do you spend in supporting worship or supporting evangelism? Now, that's not something they're going to know right off the top of their heads, right? Because they probably, they're not tracking that, but it may require asking the staff, including the pastor, could you just track your time roughly for like a month or 2 months, just so we can get some idea of how much time is spent supporting each of these areas, because that's going to help you in being able to show where are the time and talents part of the things that we bring to our ministry. But then it also helps you divide up, perhaps, right? How are some of the dollars being spent, right, for the salaries for the staff? Now, some of this is easy, right? So like if you're paying an organist or paying a choir director, well, okay, that can probably all go in worship. But some of these are less obvious, like fellowship or community outreach, and so it'll take a bit of effort then to work with the staff to try to understand how do they spend their time. Members of the congregation. So how are they involved in this? Well, you're going to want to have, I had talked about with the congregation committees, you're going to want to have members of the congregation that are part of the committee or maybe are just impacted by the ministry. So for example, if one of the ministries is, I'm thinking to my own congregation, we have a stretch of road in Olathe, which is where we're located, where we kind of do the maintenance of that stretch of highway for like a mile, and we go and like pick up trash and clean that. Well, we might want to have not the folks that are running that committee, but the folks that get involved, the volunteers, right? To give us a quote for, what's that work you do, or for outreach, say, how are you impacted, or how have you been blessed by what that committee is doing, or that ministry is doing. Getting those testimonials is as I had mentioned earlier, is fabulous for helping to tell the story of that particular ministry. And then creative writers. So it's always good when you're putting these together to have those folks that have a flair for writing, or maybe that's what they do, that can help put this together to describe the particular key area or the different ministries that are supported. They may be able to come up with particular quotes that may apply to that particular area, or bring in other materials or other perspectives that with their creative bent can really help to help the narrative budget shine or stand out. So, as I said, it takes a village of all these folks to put this together, and of course that means whoever's kind of managing this process needs it needs to plan for the time needed to gather the input that all of these different different areas can bring to bear on putting the budget together. All right, step 3. I kind of have alluded to some of these already, but what's the information? You've defined your key areas, ministry areas. You've got your people lined up for providing information for the narrative budget. What is it they need to provide? So for each key ministry area, for each of your 6 areas, you need to gather this information, just a description of the ministry. What is this ministry about? 2, what are the activities that go on in this ministry? So for the outreach area, you can describe outreach, what the vision is for that within the congregation, but then what are the things that you're currently doing or planning to do as a part of that ministry area? A biblical quotation, which will help connect that particular ministry to the overall mission of the church. There are probably a number that can be applied to each area of the ministry. The dollar figure, the budgetary dollar figure, of course, right? That has to be included. It could also include, if you're wanting for comparison purposes to show like, here's what we spent last year, then that would be probably good information too, especially if your congregation is used to seeing that kind of information, then that would help them understand how does this year's budget number relate to last year's. But again, don't go crazy with the dollar figures. What's the percentage of the dollars for this particular area compared to the overall total budget? So the percentage of the total budget. And then we talked about tracking the time spent by volunteers and staff. I guess I should have put in number of staff hours too. So here, but this would be how many volunteers do you have in each particular area, and how much time are they spending? And so I would say the same thing. How much staff time is spent on these particular areas? And then I like this last one a lot. With more, we could enhance this ministry by. I love that aspect of this, right? That's helping to, that's kind of providing the hook to people to think about their donation. If the outreach committee had more money, they would be doing this. Oh, well, that's awesome, right? I want to give some money for that. All right, step number 4, allocating the gifts. So as you would imagine, writing a narrative budget is more art than science, which means that there's not really a formula. Although I'm telling you my 5 easy steps, but there's not necessarily a specific formula for what what you have to do for a narrative budget. But it is an art, and meaning that maybe the first time you do it, it may not be perfect. I mean, rarely do things that we do the first time, are they perfect? But if you stick with it, then you can refine it, you can hone it, you can tailor it to what your congregation might expect, what works for sharing the message. I talked about trying to allocate or understanding how the pastor spends their time. That can, as I said, that can be a challenge. Understanding how do you allocate the pastor's salary across the different categories, the different key categories, those 6 areas. But tracking the time, I know it's a pain, but tracking the time will help provide a good understanding of that. And I would say you don't have to try to be perfect, right? You don't have to have them track their time down to 15 minute or 30-minute increments, but just to get some sense, right? So don't let a perfect time tracking get in the way of good enough. It would be my advice there. You're just looking for what's a reasonable representation of the amount of time spent, because that can then help drive showing how the time of the staff and the volunteers are spent supporting our ministries, and then that helps get back to how are we spreading these expenses amongst those 6 areas as well. And I talked about this will be challenging for the first time. It will be, but it gets easier in subsequent years because you learn from what went well or what didn't go well from the prior year, and can tailor it to, as I said, feedback you might have gotten, or what seemed to work well as far as sharing the message. The graphs that you see are just an example, and I love these graphs because they themselves can, in a snapshot, can kind of tell a story. So looking at the top one, the gifts of treasure, you can see that in this example, the largest area of expense is with worship. So that may be a surprise to some folks, right? It may be a surprise to everybody, but I think knowing that can help drive meaningful conversation. So I'll call this is kind of a byproduct of the narrative budget, and this helps where in planning for maybe future years is that you go, we're spending $75,000 for worship every year, and that's our largest expense. Why is that? And then you can ask the question, and is that what we want it to be? And I don't know, that's up to each congregation, but at least it'll drive those conversations about where are we spending our money, and this provides a great picture to be able to drive those conversations. And then likewise with time. So you can see down on the bottom, 6,000 hours of the time spent for this congregation is in pastoral care. Interesting. So what does that mean? Is that what we want it to be? Are we an older congregation where pastoral care is probably more of a concern or a larger part of our ministry? Then that might make sense. But if not, then there's it's something that you might want to look at. And also then you can relate that to the gifts of treasure amount, because if you look up above, $25,000 is being spent in pastoral care, whereas that's a huge chunk of the time being spent. Well, are we spending enough money there? I think again that's a question that arrives in that, but it drives meaningful discussion based on this larger representation of data that you might not have had before. All right, so you've allocated all of the gifts of treasure to each of your different ministry areas and the time. So then now you're ready to put this all together into a narrative budget package. And so that's typically those are published then. I'd mentioned this part of a stewardship program. So yeah, this is a great stewardship tool. You have this multi-page narrative budget that tells the story of your congregation and can be given out to the members of the congregation, so they all can understand what is it we're doing, right? How are we planning to spend the money that we have projected in our budget. It's also something that can be shared at the annual meeting. So typically at our annual meetings, we approve the budget. Well, this can be used as a tool to help everyone in the congregation understand how are we spending our money, and to make sure that they all are in alignment with what the plan is that's being put forward from the finance committee and from the council and so forth. So the publication of this is sharing this putting this document together, this narrative budget document, and then sharing it with the different constituent groups that you have, all the members of your congregation, and as we said before, those outside the congregation as well, prospective members, perhaps other groups as well. So at this point, I wanted to share a couple of examples of what a completed narrative budget looks like. The first example I have is a narrative budget example that was from the same document that I pulled the quote out of right at the beginning of this presentation. And I want to give a plug to the elca.org website, in that if a lot of this information that I have relied on to put together narrative budgets before, and that I use to help capture a lot of this information in this presentation, I got from some of this documentation, and this document, the document that contains this budget example is a great resource for putting together a narrative budget. So I highly recommend that, and you can find that and other resources on the elca.org website under the it's under resources, and I think finances or financial, and you can find a bunch of stuff there. So let me change what I'm sharing, and I'll share that budget as soon as I find the right button here. So is everyone seeing now the St. David by the Lake Anglican Church budget? Okay, very good. So okay, so look at this as this is the first page, or the cover page of a budget document that they have put together. This is a good example, and and you can see they have the same 6 areas of key ministry areas that we've been talking about. So that was not accidental that I chose those to talk through. And so let me show you how this works. So they have companions, and then their format was companions in worship, in Christian education, etc. And so we go to the first ministry area, which is we are companions in worship. And so here you go. Here in one page for this ministry area, you've got all the elements of a narrative budget that we talked about. We've got a scriptural quotation right up here. And then we have just the general description around this area of ministry, worship, or as they called it, word and sacrament. They put in here, I like this touch, they put in here, what are the opportunities for worship, right? So reminding everybody what worship opportunities we have, when are we worshiping. And then they get into some detail here around this area of ministry includes, and they list out the different things. Now, as you read through here, you can see how this will help then relate or help determine how much of the staff time, and hence the salary expense, you should allocate to some of these areas. So it talks about, one of the bullets here is this area of ministry includes a secretary and many volunteers who prepare the weekly order of service. Oh, okay. So we need to find out how much time our secretary is spending on putting together the worship bulletin, and the volunteers that are helping with worship, how much time are they spending? Maintenance of the building and property, right? Oh yeah, we are meeting in the sanctuary. Well, probably most of us are, right? So how much of the maintenance of the building should we allocate for worship, right? To maintain the worship space that we have. Priest or pastoral visitors who visit and bring communion to shut-ins. Oh, okay. So how much of the time is related to that aspect of this? The choir. Do we have a choir director? Is his or her time spent, how much of their time is spent preparing for worship? So you get it, right? You get how outlining with the various aspects of the various items that are covered in this area of ministry then can help guide you to how much time is spent here, and hence how many dollars should really be allocated to support this area of ministry. I like the fact that they have, here's the quote here from a new member of the congregation, and it talks about reconnecting with a sense of faith. That's great. And then down here at the bottom, you've got some numbers. Now it doesn't give you all the detail, right? So it doesn't tell you how much of the pastor's time is spent here, or how much of the choir director's time is spent here. It gives you a total. And for hours spent, and then the cost of this ministry. So you know full well that behind that, for the budget for 2009, it says $53,000. Well, that's where you use your line item budget to break out the staff time and the maintenance costs for the building, the choir director's salary, et cetera. That's where you use those numbers from the line item budget to put together this one number that says $53,000. The next one that they've got here, there we go, Christian education. So this one, if there is a youth director, this one's probably much of that position's salary goes here. But again, the same thing. It's got a Bible quotation. It's got a description of the ministry overall, and then what does this ministry include? And they have a couple of quotes here. To me, I can almost see the pictures that you could put on these pages as well, right? You can put a picture of Sunday school, or Bible school, or all the other things that are supported here. Likewise for worship. I mean, that's obvious, right? You can have a picture from worship, or the choir singing, or whatever. It just lends itself to that. Evangelism. The same format. So you're getting the idea, right? That this is a narrative budget. For the budget piece of this, there are basically 6 pages, 1 page for each area of ministry. And yet how many budget numbers are you seeing? You're seeing 2 numbers per page. So there's 12 numbers that are being shared here for your budget that will add up then to your total budget for the year. But it's broken out by specific area ministry, just showing the total that's going to be spent on evangelism in this case, and knowing that behind that is the more mundane expenses for salaries and the building and what else? Mission trips and that sort of thing. Okay, let me pause here for a second. Okay. All right, I saw the chat had a thing, but I don't think we had any questions. Yeah, okay, cool. Oh, thanks, Dave, for putting that link in there.
Yeah, no, we just posted that. Yeah, so you're
okay.
good.
Good deal. Okay. All right, so let me skip ahead. So they have a page for each of the key ministry areas we talked about. Then in this, they also provide some raw stats. You don't have to do this. This is something that they had shown just again to provide one source of documentation for which contains like some vital statistics for the congregation. So that's kind of interesting. For me, again, if you're just wanting to focus on the narrative budget, then you don't have to include this, but they have. I think they've got, here we go. They've got the pie charts to show that breakout, and I think these are really effective. As I pointed out, this is really effective in kind of painting a bigger picture around the budget, and that causes people to think about how much funding is going to the particular areas of the budget, and does that seem right? Do we need to put more there? If we put more there, could I donate more to that? Because I'd really like to see outreach, more money spent for outreach. Okay, well, this is how much we're spending in relation to worship. That'll drive conversation around that. And then this gets into proportionate giving. So talking about for each individual member to determine how much they want to contribute. So again, not part of the narrative budget per se, but part of what they are presenting as an example. And this sample budget is part of the document that I talked about. I'll scroll all the way to the back here, and this is, or the front. And this is the cover page for that document that is available from the elca.org website. Let's see, how are we doing on time? Okay, doing good. Let me also share the narrative budget that we put together for the Synod a couple of years ago. Okay, is everyone seeing that? It says 2020 narrative budget. We got that? Okay. So obviously this is for 2020. So this was what we shared at the 2019 Synod Assembly. And this was really one of our earlier attempts at a narrative budget. And this was the year that the executive committee spent some time trying to understand what were the priorities for the Synod. And so we were looking at wanting to understand, how does that inform our budgeting? How does that alter that? And are we spending our money? How are we spending our money to support these different priorities? So so what we did is we identified what are the 5 priorities that we want to focus on, and then how are we going to spend then our money to support each of these 5. And so you can see that we put these in order of priority, allocated how much time was being spent by the staff. So we did do some time tracking, right, to understand that. And then we used these different areas to then tell the story. Now this is not to the level of work that the other budget example has. So we don't have, and this is we're still working on this, right? We're not at the level of the narrative budget that we saw. So we don't have like scriptural quotes in here, nor do we have testimonial kinds of quotes. We can certainly do charts and graphs. So I think that's something I'll probably work on for next year. But if I had to do this one over, I would definitely include that so we could show that pie chart, since we had the percentages already. But you can see we did talk about provide for this area of ministry, which we had a high priority on: provide, maintain, and grow congregation leadership. We plan and implement services, systems, and programs for, and then we list out the different specific ministries that this area of the budget supports. And so it talks about campus ministry, our outdoor ministries, candidacy, and so forth. And then parish ministry, and then our Bethany College, Wartburg, and the Lutheran School of Theology seminaries. And then the table here shows, and this is how much in 2020 we are planning to spend on those. So we didn't, again, in hindsight, we should have had a total here just to show what's our total dollar cost for this particular area. But we broke it out into how much is the staff and our administrative costs. We actually use the A word here, so we probably shouldn't have. But how much is our staff and I'll say our the mundane costs that the Synod has. So we don't have a building, but we have rent, right? So we have rent and we have a copier and that kind of stuff. So office supplies. So that's what's included in that administrative line item. So we're showing, well, how much of that should be allocated then to this area of ministry for our staff time and our I'll say our office operating costs, travel, grants. So these are meaning how much money are we granting to some of these ministries to help support them, like Tomashinga or like our seminaries, and then the other programs that are funded through this, like campus ministry. So each section then follows that same format. A brief description of what this is, and then what are the specific ministries that we're supporting, and then how much of our overall budget are we allocating from that, how much of the staff time is would be allocated for that particular area of the budget, and so forth. So we get through all 5 of these, and down here then we talk about that's for the ELCA, and then we talk about, so how are these funded? And so we spent some time here talking about how the different ministries of the Synod are funded. Obviously, our biggest source of funding is congregational support, and so we show that, even though this is not following a traditional narrative format, it fits with the format that we were using in this particular year to break out our different areas of support that are used to fund the 5 areas of ministry that we talked about before. And so this was the narrative budget that we had for last year. And like I said, this was published in the Senate Assembly material along with the line item budget that I showed you right at the beginning of the presentation. That so they have both, so that those people that want to dive into the specific line items, they've got a budget that they can look at. For those that don't, they've got a narrative budget that can help describe what are these areas of ministry and how much of our, at a high level, how much of our budget are we allocating to those. So it makes for it can make for some interesting questions at budget hearings or during the business of the assembly of people coming at it from different levels of perspective. So, all right, I think that gets me to the end of my material. So I guess I'll pause again and see if there are any other questions. Or any questions, I guess, for that matter, that I can answer or help with.
I have a question, Scott.
Sure.
For congregations that are so used to seeing line item budgets,
Yeah.
And I've floated the idea out there that we should move to a more narrative format, or at least right beside the line item stuff. What are some things that you would recommend that we do as a congregation or leaders in our congregations to help urge this type of budget along?
I think part of that answer can come from where's the resistance coming from? Because I will be honest and say that I had been a congregational treasurer for a long time, and I at first didn't see the need for doing a narrative budget because we put together the line item budget. It's completely transparent for what we're spending our money on, and that should work, right? But then I guess the change of heart I had came from the fact that, as I said, most people, as soon as I start talking about a lot of numbers, they stop listening. And so we then started, and actually at the Synod level, is where I first started publishing narrative budgets, and that was so that we could tell the story, because we would always get questions around, well, where is the Synod spending its money? Even though we shared the line item budget, it didn't tell the story. And so I go there because if you're getting resistance from the people that are putting the budget together, so the finance committee or the treasurer or whoever, that's going to be a tough one. So I would think that they are going to want they'll put together the line item budget. I think then it's going to be a matter of there's going to have to be some leadership to pull together those additional people that I talked about to help pull in some of the other resources, and perhaps just the fact of recruiting additional folks to help participate in putting this together will help get over some of that resistance. I think also emphasizing the fact that this can be a very effective stewardship tool to help tell the story, I think should help sell doing this as well, right? Because it does provide, as you saw in the example, the first example I talked about, it really on one page can really effectively tell the story of here's this area of ministry and here's what we're doing in this area. And I noticed they didn't have my favorite question, but I could envision if we had more money here, we could fill in the blank. So I don't know if that helped you a lot, Chris, or not. I mean, I think it's going to take some, probably it may take some council intervention, right, to help drive that, because if the need is to really effectively tell the story for the congregation, I would think that would help to convince them that this is an effective tool for that.
Yeah, that helps, and is gets me on a track of kind of where to go next. So
Yeah, and if I can
Okay.
add a little bit to that, Scott, if you don't mind.
Sure, please.
Part of our challenge here is, we've been doing the line item budget we've been doing forever, right?
Yeah.
I mean, how
Yeah.
many congregations have, and how well's it been working? My old marketing hat comes on. Scott even said before, this is kind of a form of marketing. I know sometimes we shy away from business language in the church, but if you think about businesses, they all publish, well, for lack of a better term, a narrative budget. I mean, a good business tells their story. In the back of that annual report is all the numbers, but the first 80 pages of that 100-page report is the narrative. It's here's what we're doing, here's the new stuff we discovered, here's where we're headed, and all of that is, and if you want to know the numbers, they're in the back there. And so, it is about telling our story, which we've not been real good at. And for those naysayers, particularly if they are in the finance group or whatever, we're not taking away the line item. When Scott started, you still need to do that work. So it's there. This is some additional work, and it really is about telling the story of why we exist. And I think for me, a couple of the key things that come up on the side of the equation I get on is, when Scott says give a description, I can't tell you how many times I ask committees. I can remember when I was in my own congregations. Well, tell me, why do you exist? What's the purpose of your committee? You can't get an answer, right? And you get, and they can't. And so part of this is, well, then we better figure out what we are doing. And if our own committees can't figure that out, how can we expect our congregation members to quote unquote pony up, right? So I think part of it is really stressing the fact that we need to market who and what we are. And it's not easy. It is not an easy task, but I think when you start challenging, groups to say, well, tell us why you're here. What do you do? What do you do? And once they can do that, then all of a sudden, well, we do this and we do that, and you get some of those stories. So I think it is really about helping folks see that, man, I don't know what the numbers, Scott, or if you've experienced it, but I would say at least 90% of our folks could care less about an line on a budget.
Yeah.
It's, and that may be too high or too low of a figure, but
it may be. Yeah.
I mean, we do it every year, Scott, right? At the end of the year, before we go in, we hold these, Scott holds these budget meetings, and relatively speaking, it's only a few people that attend in the whole synod, because that's the rest of us read the narrative stuff, say, okay, I'm in, and that's really what it's about. Because the handful of folks that really want the line item, you still got it, but we need to tell the story.
Those are the folks that show up to the budget hearing with a calculator. So
yes,
yeah,
right,
yeah.
And God bless them. We need those folks.
Right?
Oh yeah,
absolutely. Keep me honest.
They're not, in the end, they're not the ones that are going to pony it all up, because they may be part of it, but we need the other 90 or 95% to come along. And when they buy into the story, that's when this really takes off. So.
Scott?
Yes.
Yes. You were saying, and tell me if I'm misunderstanding, that the narrative budget could be different people. The treasurer could still be doing their thing and doing the line item. And then this other group would be working on a narrative budget.
Yep. Because the example we saw, right, there were only 12 numbers in that whole budget that was shared, and really they just took the totals. They used the raw material of the line item budget to put together those I'll call them summary numbers. So yeah, Treasurer, Finance Committee, if they produce the line item budget, then they've provided the raw material. Now, it'd be great, right, if they then could also continue to work on the narrative budget. I think there's no reason they couldn't. But if they didn't want to, if they were like their work is done, then okay. But then other people could fill in the other stuff, right? The committee folks or the creative writers could then fill in the other stuff. All right.
Thank you, Scott.
Sure.
This is very helpful, very informative. So
Good. I'm glad. I'm glad. So,
Yeah.
so Dave, do you want me to send you the presentation I walked through? I don't know if you share those or
That would be great if
Okay.
you could. And I've
Yeah.
posted in the chat the link that Scott talked about on the LCA website. If you want to
Great.
cut and paste that, you can copy it. But and then Tim can make this available if people want it. This has been recorded, I do believe, and so
Yep.
we'll make it available to the folks too. But yeah, if you would, Scott, that would be great. And that way people
Okay.
want the stuff. And
Yep.
and to those of you that are, for your own stuff at the congregation, if you need help or you want to talk through it, I am available to either meet with you via Zoom or in person, depending on scheduling, to talk to your folks about why these things are important and how we can, better move forward. So I'd be glad to help you all with that as
Yeah.
well.
I would
do
too.
it, and I'll help you get started.
I'll be glad to help as well too.
Yeah.
Also, if there are other questions that come up, yeah.
is that that PowerPoint that you had? Is that something we could use and rework for our own contexts?
The presentation I shared?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. I put that together. So yeah, that's fine. Yeah. I give you permission to use it. Yes.
Well, thank you.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank y'all for
Outstanding.
participating. I know Cheryl and John had to bug out for another meeting, but appreciate y'all participation. And Scott, as always, thanks for your leadership and your willingness to do this.
You're welcome. Glad to do it.